So another reading that got dropped from the syllabus for the remainder of the course when we switched to online instruction and many of you had left your textbooks behind in Boston is this selection by Nigel Crisp that is titled Turning the World Upside Down and provides another critical examination of the role of foreign aid and the unintended consequences that it might have. I wanted to still bring the concept and ideas that Chris discusses into the course, even though I couldn't share the reading with you, for a couple of reasons. One is because I really like the framing that it depends upon in terms of turning the world upside down. I've depicted this for you simply through this world map that is depicted in the reverse of the map that you're most familiar seeing, because in many ways, North is a construct. Yes, there are magnetic physical differences between North and South, but there's no reason why North necessarily has to be on top and South has to be on bottom. And by simply just flipping this physical depiction of the world to put the Southern Hemisphere on top, including many countries whose economies have been impacted by colonialism, who themselves have a lower middle income economic distribution, and really help to recast how we think about the world. Another is because CRISP addresses these two different flows in foreign aid and in global health. One is brain drain, which we've already talked about, which is the flow from less wealthy countries to wealthier countries of trained healthcare professionals, many of whom receive support in their home countries for their medical education and then brought their training to settings like the United States for reasons, again, as we've addressed before, that might make a lot of sense for them as individuals, but point to some broader systemic problems in the way that we think about the global health workforce and how we could better support people within the countries from which they come, rather than having this higher potential standard of living only available for them with their immigration to wealthier nations. The other, though, flow that Crisp addresses in his chapter is about the flow of ideas, particularly the way that the flow of ideas from the West about what health should look like, what medical care should look like, flow to what is called the rest, and often really shape the national agenda in these settings in a way that's inconsistent with the needs of those places. And so because you don't have the reading yourself, I am going to share two brief passages from it with you. So Crisp writes, "I was the wrong person with the wrong question at the wrong time. As the Mozambique Minister of Health entered the small committee room with his officials in tow, I could see immediately that he was very cross. We were at the World Health Assembly in Geneva in 2006, and I had requested an interview in order to ask him what the UK should be doing to help improve health in Africa. I don't know where he had just come from. I now wonder if he had been sitting all morning in meetings where he and his African colleagues had felt patronized by people from rich donor countries telling them what they should be doing. Perhaps he was merely suffering from too many hours of long speeches and the interminable time wasting of that great assembly. Upright, smartly dressed, and very articulate, he let me know from the outset that he was fed up with being told what to do by foreigners. He understood his own country very well, thank you. He knew what his priorities were. Did I understand that the international agencies providing pills for immunization were only doing part of the job? What use was a pill if a child didn't have any clean water to swallow it with? He didn't care if immunization was their priority. He wanted help with infrastructure, water, roads, schooling, and employment. He didn't want to be told what he should be doing. This, my first meeting, with Minister Paulo Ivo Garrido reminded me of the story I had heard about one of his predecessors as health minister for Mozambique, who had naturally assumed that on taking office he would be responsible for the health of his population. He discovered, however, that he was really the minister for health projects which, he paused for effect, were run by foreigners. It also underscored very clearly what it felt like to be a recipient of foreign aid. Mozambique, in common with other countries, received aid from many individual countries, including the UK, from international agencies, and from many NGOs, small and large. All of them gave aid on their own terms, and all of them wanted it monitored against their own criteria. It is only a small step from here to telling people what to do. Later in his chapter, Chris continues. It shouldn't come as a surprise to know that donor countries don't all want the same things. The USA promotes health insurance and, by implication, wants users to pay some of the cost of their own health care. Each country, it seems, exports its own beliefs about how health services should be run, regardless, apparently, of the success or failure of those policies in their home countries. This is not in itself a new trend. Former British colonies from Hong Kong to Jamaica have health services modeled on the British NHS, and for a long period, their medical and nursing schools had many expatriates on their staff. This legacy lives on in the thousands of young professionals who have come to the UK for their training and who still aspire to membership of one of the UK Royal Colleges. Medical staff from former French colonies can tell a similar story and exhibit the same high level of pride in their graduation from a French university and their years of training in Paris or Lyon or Marseille. They, just like the South American or Filipinos trained in the US system, take home with them a share in the experience and worldview of their teachers and mentors. More problematically, we have seen the intrusion of current domestic politics into international development. Two linked issues, birth control and abortion, have heavily influenced American policy, provoked a split with many other donors, and slowed progress on improving death rates amongst women and children, as well as on AIDS. In this reading more broadly, Chris conveys this idea that power sets the agenda in global health, that the power of these wealthy donor countries and the influence that they have on health professionals who, in this case, are trained in settings like the United States or the UK or France, and then do return back to their home countries in the converse of brain drain in some ways, spread with them these ideas of those settings that may be at a disjuncture with the needs of the country in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of education, and so forth. And further, that this power setting the agenda dynamic is complicated by the fact that wealthy donor countries don't all want the same things, such as, for example, funding from the United States that cannot be used for abortion services due to the Hyde Amendment, or even in times when the global gag rule is active as it is currently for reproductive health services from facilities that provide abortions with other funding, not from the United States, or who provide counseling about a full suite of reproductive options to clients who could then go and potentially obtain an abortion elsewhere, or even political advocacy for abortion rights in those home settings. And so when you have countries like that, which, for example, restrict the ability to use funding with any entity that's even connected to abortion in any way, and then you have a funding package from another country that does address abortion as healthcare that should be included in a country's provision of packages to its citizens, you have this disjuncture. Other than abortion, which I've addressed just here, can you provide examples of how we've seen this in what we've learned about so far in foreign aid, or what you know about from other settings? And what impact does this have on the countries receiving aid if you have donor countries that have conflict over what their priorities are and ways in which they want their funding to be used for certain vertical programs? Further, what do you think it would actually mean for people from wealthy countries to listen better to people from low-income countries? How could this be institutionalized? And is this realistic?